Okay, welcome to another live stream this week. We're going to be looking at some specific topics in our live streams going forward, things that I've collected from people saying that they would like certain things. And then I'm going to start making some new non live stream videos for next week. And we'll get some of those topics posted up too. And, so we'll see how it goes. So we'll see how many people are on for this and how this video tracks later. It's a topic that I get asked about a lot, and I actually deal with students quite regularly on this topic because it seems like more and more producers are working on laptops at home or on the go, and so they're doing a lot of the creation and then editing and mixing. And so, one of the questions or interests from people is, can we do the mastering part on our headphones and as well, or do we need to do everything else super cheap and then pay a small fortune for a mastering engineer, or use one of those services online where you can upload it and it's more affordable, but it's not necessarily personable. It may be someone who doesn't know anything about what you do or what your process is like. So, what are some of the things we can do inside Logic itself to do some mastering? And I find that this is a really interesting topic, partially because I think we can talk about some things that may confirm some of your thoughts about this, some of the ways that you might want to work. And so, we'll start with that. We'll just start with some of the tips and uh, tricks for mastering and maybe explain a little bit of what it means, even. It used to be, and still sometimes is, something a little different when you're in the big leagues than when you're doing like an at-home production. And part of that is because mastering is not just making the individual song sound good and appropriately loud, but it's also when you're working on an album, making sure each of the songs sound like they belong together, that the spacing between songs is appropriate, that there's the right fade in and fade out, and that it sounds like a cohesive album. But I find, even with some of the biggest artists right now, in all different types of markets, that people are releasing like singles or doing EPs, small albums, and then sometimes still doing big albums. And so, with like a single, you don't need to worry about making a song sound like the next song in the playlist. And in fact, in terms of level and some of the other things like Spotify and Apple Music, if you're listening to a playlist full of different songs, they're already trying to make everything sound the same level. And so you can submit your song for distribution, and hopefully you got it at the approximately right level, and then their systems will even it out. So that's why it's pretty rare on the major platforms. It still happens, but it's pretty rare that you're going to be listening to a bunch of songs from different artists and have one of them be super soft, another one be super loud. They're going to even out that as much as they can beforehand. So let's talk a little bit about Logic itself. Hopefully, that's why you're here, to learn a little bit about that and figure out what that might look like for you. Because Logic has some great tools for mastering, and I think it's worth taking a peek at what we can do in there. So essentially, when you're working on a mix like this, let's go over to the very end. We have a couple different tracks here. We have this one called the stereo out and one called the master. And these two work in conjunction. In fact, you can do various things with the stereo out in terms of what we have going on. If you have an interface that has multiple outputs, there's certainly some stuff you can do with it with multiple outputs. But this is where you'll see on the master track, there's nothing up above here. There's a fader here to control volume. There's a place to do automation, but we don't have, and this is kind of right over my shoulder here. Let me zoom in for a second. We don't have on the master track anywhere to like put effects, but on the stereo output, we do. In fact, that's where a bounce button is to do the export. So we have right here the place where you can put some effects. And so you can actually change the entire song going through that stereo out and make it sound like something else. And so this is where, for instance, I would put the multimeter. And with the multimeter, this tells us everything about the sound that's coming out. And so I'm listening to one of the songs. This is a song that I've pretty much wrapped up, but I'm at the mastering phase before I upload it into distribution and put it out there, because right now I just finished essentially the mix and I really like how it sounds, but that doesn't mean it's in all of the right place in terms of levels, in terms of the spectrum of it. And so I got to make sure I go through and handle some of that. So let's just listen a little bit and look at this analyzer. Before, imagine what we had in store. Here you are, half a world away from me, thinking of the things to say, trying to change our yesterdays. Now I know I miss the chance for you and me, lost the chance to know, So one of the things that we're most interested in is the LUFS, which is the loudness unit full scale. A lot of times this is what the different platforms are going to be measuring, and if you're above where they want you to be, then they're going to do some dynamic control, and if you're below, then they're going to push it up and squish it a little bit. So if you can get this close to where they're expecting it to be, then your song has a greater chance of sounding like you intended it to when it plays back on their platform. So that's one of the things. And you can look up a lot of those different specs in places on the internet. On my other screen here, let's see if I can just do a quick search. So I just did a Google search, and it says -14 LUFS. This is on the iZotope website. I trust iZotope, but that doesn't mean Spotify hasn't changed it at some point. And you'll see on my track here that I'm definitely above that. I just dragged this little line to where 14 is, right? So you can actually move those lines. That helps give you a little bit of a sense of where things are. So anything now above that line will be a different shade. Understand why we never met before. Imagine what we had. So here's the problem. Here's the problem with this tool and a bunch of other limiters and compressors that you might be using to do this. Instead of, if I put a limiter on here, instead of having a limiter that says limit this to -14 LUFS, we have this thing where it has an output level, it has gain, it has a release time, it has 2 different modes, it has true peak detection. It doesn't say anything about LUFS, even the metering doesn't. And so this is your first hurdle. We have to work both of these things in tandem with each other. And there are tools, if you're really doing mastering with Logic, get the iZotope toolkit, right? Because that's where you're going to get a little bit better tools with this. But I'm, not necessarily suggesting everyone can even afford to get all the iZotope tools for this. And so I want to show you a little bit of doing this in Logic. And then Miles said it in the comments, says you can get a tool that will check your mix against all of the social media LUFS standards. Worth finding. Definitely worth finding. I have a TC Electronic box that I have hooked up and my signal's always going to it, and it does a full comprehensive scope of that. That is not cheap at all. And so that solution, I'm not showing that one today necessarily either, because it's like I don't want to say, yeah, now you have to become a mastering engineer. What I'm doing mostly, what I'm most interested in doing is showing you each, like in Logic, if you just have the basic toolkit, how can you kind of get to that place? And this technique has really translated my mix as well when I put them on things like Apple Music. So that part I think has been great. They sound really close to what I uploaded. And that is even if they go up to -12. But the real truth is, if I'm hovering around -12, theoretically, here's the problem with this. If I change the output level on my limiter, which I actually don't want to do, it's going to lower the ceiling of limiting, so it actually does more work here. So a lot of times if I have it kind of where I want it, then I'm just going to come in between these two and do a gain plugin. And with the gain plugin, I'm going to push play. We'll get the multimeter back up because there we go. I'm going to see if I can't get that a little closer to hovering around -14. So even though it's going above the 14, barely, not much. I think that is within acceptable things. I could put, if I needed to really fine tune that, I could put another limiter right after it and just do the fraction of limiting just so that it doesn't go across. So a limiter is, if you're new to audio production in the beginning, a compressor, which is similar to a limiter. A compressor is like a fader on a mixing console. Every time something gets louder than you want it to, it's just like a robot that turns down the fader a little bit, and then when it starts getting softer, it pushes it back up. So it keeps it even, but it's like an automatic fader control. Well, a limiter, you just set like a brick wall, and every time the audio gets a certain level, it bounces, it like goes up against it, and it gets turned down so it never crosses that threshold. And so that's, a limiter is really great for like maximum control. Some limiters are better than others. The L series from Waves is incredible. The one in Logic, this limiter I'm using, is just a really basic limiter. It has a precision mode and a legacy mode. I use precision. I do true peak detection to make sure that it knows when to pull that down. And for the most part, it sounds pretty good. Thomas is asking if I'm at the loudest point in the song right now. And the truth is, I've got it limited, so for the most part, all the peaks don't ever cross a certain area. If I were doing this in a song that had more dynamic range, louder and softer sections, I would certainly go to the loudest section and ensure that I was getting a similar thing. But on the other hand, I would rework my mix a little bit because even if your song is softer for a little while and then it goes louder, their systems are still going to try to compensate. And so you could end up with things outside of your control. And I'd rather control it in the mix and my mastering phase than letting, Apple Music or Spotify control it. And so that's part of it right there, is letting that part happen at the right time. And so with that, if you have a really soft section, you make it softer in different ways than actually super soft. And what I mean by that is arrangement, it's softer, or the complexity of the part but the actual volume, this LUFS, is going to be still in the right ballpark for it. And so, I mean, that's the part of that we have to think about. Let's talk about the spectrum, though, because loudness, we keep on coming back to, and we'll keep on checking it and making sure it's in the right place no matter what else happens. But how do we know if all of the other parts are okay? And this is a headphone conversation, because I do think there are some things you can do with headphones that will ensure what you create sounds like what you think it is. And I still mix in control rooms. We've got some great ones on campus and some other ones in town. I still bring stuff there to check it. I do endless listening in various places, but I do the majority of the initial work on headphones. And there's like, I don't know, 4 or 5 different things that are really important. One of them is the pair of headphones you have, right? You don't want a cheap pair of headphones. You typically want to use closed back headphones while recording so you don't get bleed, and open back headphones when you're mixing and mastering. That's a generalized rule. I think anybody can master and mix on closed back as well if they know what they're doing. That's fine. Another thing would be to use some sort of room system, like the NX from Waves, or even if you have the AirPod Maxes from Apple, there's a head tracking part of that if you have one of the M1 or M2 processors and work in universal mode. So that's like 6 people, right? But there's a few systems like that that are really good. I'll show you the NX in just a minute if you haven't seen it before. I use that religiously. Not all the time when I'm recording, but when I start to actually mix and listen, I'm always using the NX system. It's amazing. So let me go back through and look at some of the other comments real quick. Let's see. Martin says, I've noticed that when setting a limiter to minus 0.3 decibels, for example, and checking the bounce file that in the DAW again, it hits minus 0.1 decibels at the loudest, which confuses me. I'd have to see if you're using the exact logic limiter. I mean, none of these tools are 100%. I know we have true peak detection. Make sure that that's turned on. Let's just pull this up for a second and see what the manual says. So turn on this to detect intersample peaks in the signal. That's just saying that some stuff still could get through and go above. If I've noticed that things that are happening like that, first of all, I'm never ever mastering something in Logic to minus 0.3 decibels. Mostly because when you get to the minus 14 LUFS, even though the peaks can go up there, I mean, we're not talking about every little peak being minus 14 dB. That's not the same terminology. But things still do get louder. And in those situations, I'm mastering a little bit less. You can see I'm doing minus 3 decibels right here, not even 0.3. And then I'm doing even more gain down to match it in the minus 14 LUFS. So if I really am picky about the exact 0.1, 0.2, and I need to be something very specific for a reason, then I usually technically run 2 different dynamics tools in tandem. But there are some things that, I mean, it's not even a brick wall. If you're working without the true peak detection on, things can get through. Dan says, great knowledge. Thank you. You're welcome. Miles Edit says, welcome back to the 1970s engineering and way less compression. And then Miles Edit says, correct both of you. Sweet. So there's stuff. I feel like sometimes it feels confusing. But here's the thing I hear a lot from people doing their own kind of like limiting. They say it's loud in Logic when I do it, but when I put it out and export it. It doesn't sound as loud. And there's always, every time someone has brought me a project where that's the case, I've always figured out where they screwed up. And there's a variety of things that it could be. But there's not like, as far as I know, and somebody who's watching this can definitely put in the comments, no, there's a bug that Logic, lowers your volume after you bounce out your file, but that's not an experience I've ever had, and there's certainly lots of bugs in this piece of software, just like every piece of software. But typically, when someone says I can't get my music as loud as other things on Spotify and Apple Music, there's usually something in the process you can trace that to, and so that's figure out what your whole signal flow is doing, what your gain staging at each level of the master chain is doing, because it does make a difference. What I'm going to do right now, though, is let's do a demonstration with some headphone stuff. And I haven't checked my battery on my NX today, but, let's hope that it has some stuff in it. So there's a number of different NX rooms, and Chris Lord Algae right now I like this one. Abbey Road, I really like. Ocean Way Studios in Nashville, I really like. Germano Studios, I hate. It's one of the only ones I've ever used where I thought it sounded worse. So I'm turning on the top of my headphones. You'll see this little thing up there. This is the tracker. I'm going to turn it on. And let's see. It does come on. It means my batteries aren't dead right this moment. It says I've got 100% battery. I don't believe that for a second. So there's two parts to this. There's the software part, and then there's the head tracker part. And in reality, you can do it without it if you have a camera on. So the camera, I don't know if this is going to break my camera by doing two of them. I guess we'll find out. So you can see my green sheet right behind me right now. And if I turn this on, oh, I already had it on. I'm not seeing there's the box. Every once in a while it's coming on. So that actually does an analysis of my head location, and you can do it without. And in fact, when you're doing some 360 things with the Ambisonics bundle from Waves, you can actually move forward and backward with the camera, but you can't move forward and backward with just the top thing. So you use them both in conjunction with each other. Okay, cool. So what does this actually mean? In here, in this interface, and I don't know, see if I can make it, no, it doesn't let me resize it. You'll see the entire control room here. I'm grabbing and moving that. And let's go back to the front. And then we have the CLA10s and sub, the mains, and then a boom box off in the corner here. And so you have these different options to be able to listen. And then you move your head and it keeps track of it. It gets more detailed. For instance, you put your circumference over your head, your ear-to-ear measurements, which I've saved in there as a preset, so you know what my head size is. And there's even headphone EQ, but my headphones aren't in here because they're already perfect. I'm just kidding, but they're really good. You can see my head moving around in there. And then we listen. And then you can move around and you hear the nuances of the space. You hear what a little bit of the reverb sounds like. You hear how if you tweak your head, the stereo image is being affected. And you can't do it, but you'll hear the results of what I'm doing as I push play here, because it's all part of it. Why we never met before. Imagine what we had in store. Here you are, half a world away from me, thinking of the things
feeling so far.
And then when you're done, you turn it off and export it. You don't want to export with this turned on. This is just a way to hear it in that situation. As I listen to that, it's like I think, okay, the low frequencies aren't like blowing me out of the water. They're, I like how they're balanced. I can hear stuff. You can do threshold listening with the level adjustment. You can change to the different speakers and look around the room. I love this. I mean, this is something that when I first saw it, it was just the basic NX room at the time, and then they slowly added these out. I think like Abbey Road came next, and then Ocean Way, and then this one. They're great. I really enjoy that thing. I still do stuff without them, but it's a great double check of everything. And let's see. Miles said it says, when in doubt, turn it down, but you didn't hear that from me. That's true. When in doubt, turn it down. That's 100% right. Dan Taylor says, other than the headset, is this a plugin that goes with Logic? Is this a plugin problem that goes with Logic? What exactly are you asking? And then he says, watching this on his phone. Cool. But there seems to be maybe a thing I didn't fully understand with what you originally wrote. Just ask it again, and I'll see exactly what you're talking about. Okay, cool. So this whole system is one of the cooler uses of technology that I've seen. There's a slight delay. It's not horrible, and when I move my head around, I can tell that I'm on a system, not just in the room, but it's really darn close. And it's as close as I think it needs to be really useful. And so you can, go back and forth. So this improves what you can do with headphones. Now, I can't show you the Apple one right this moment with the head tracking and their AirPod Max and AirPod Pros. And I can't show you mostly because it requires universal mode, not Rosetta, and I still got a couple of Rosetta things that I'm running. But it's really good. It sounds really good too. And it works with their spatial audio stuff if you're doing spatial audio mixing. And so that makes it super useful. Let's see. So the other thing. So putting a room around it, I think really helps you in terms of what you can do with listening to the song and hearing it. But there's a few other tools that I think are super useful. One of them I'll do it post limiting, I think, still. So let's do match EQ here. So that'll be here and there, match EQ. And this is one of my favorite tools for making sure that things sound right. Things that I'm missing, because headphones, what are the weaknesses of headphones? You don't have the real low frequency, the low end of the sound coming from a large speaker developing in the room, and then you get to hear it, right? A well-calibrated, well-balanced speaker subwoofer in like a designed room. That's something different than what you can do on headphones. Headphones, matter of fact, you can't even get the true low frequencies. The open back ones are a little bit better. But, like something that's 60 hertz is going to be feet long as it develops in the air. And so to be able to have that fully heard and developed, the truth is, even if that's in the room, our ears have to like guess at it and form some sort of hypothesis that it's there, because our ear cavities and eardrums still aren't the right size to able to fully actually do that. And so there's all these like psychoacoustic principles that help us understand low frequencies in our brain. And our brain does a similar thing with headphones. It's just less ideal than actually playing them in a room with all the right sound sources. So we use visual tools a lot of times with low frequencies to make sure that they're working. Okay, so Dan says, is this a plug that you buy along with the headphone adapter? So that thing that I'm using for the wave sync, it like rubber bands on top of the headphones, and it's Bluetooth enabled. So it's not a plug or anything. That just literally attaches onto your headphones at the top, and then wirelessly connects to your computer. And the plug-in loads up a third-party application, which is what handles all the movements, which is why there's a slight amount of latency, but overall I think it's really manageable. So let's do the part of the song here. And I'm going to say, let's learn.
Away, away. Try to hide the stairs. Walked at night and slept that day. As you turn around, as you spin in the light.
So that's my left and right curve. You can hear, I must have the hi-hat off to one side. There's a little bit higher frequencies on one side. And then with the reference, I don't even know if I have my files handy right this minute. Let me do a quick search for this. And then if I don't, yeah, it looks like I don't have it, but here is, I'm just loading this on the side. So it's doing an analysis of a song. Yeah, that's not going to be the right kind. It's a totally different genre. You can see this one doesn't have all of the low end that I'm doing with it, which is fine. Let me see if I have a better one. You want to match, at least match the right type of song. And I'm just pulling it off so that I don't. Should have had this part ready, but I don't, so we're fine. Weird. Okay, so we'll just pull out another one and see if it's any better. Logic bounces. No, nothing there. One more. I think I clicked the wrong file. Okay. So I'll find something here in a second and we'll keep on going, but bridge, audio track. Let's try that one. That's an MP3 though. That's not going to be a good example, but I'll just show you what happens. I think that they're on my other drive. So you'd get that analyzed and you come over here and you'd match, and then you'll see what it would take to make your song have the same spectral content as the other song. And so this is a super powerful tool because you can take something, again, you can see the one I loaded has less low frequency. And so to make it match, it has to pull the song I'm working on down. Although I like the low frequency content, it is translated well. And you can see that this other song had more mid range and less high range. So to make a match, that's what you do. And then you can actually change this curve so it's a little bit amount. You can do separate for the left and the right. We can smooth it out or leave it like here's the smoothing of that. You can really go fine tune, but you don't. Most of the time, you don't want to do that because what you end up with, you want more broad strokes. And then what I do is I don't even necessarily use this on my master all the time. I have, but most of the time I say, "Oh my goodness! Like, look how much extra bass my mix has compared to this, like award-winning track." I need to like double check my bass to make sure it's not too crazy. And then I'm like, ooh, I also made this way too bright. I mean, look at that hit right after 20K. So it's like I go through and then I come back, I turn that off, and I rework my mix to make it work. Because I'm more interested in getting the mix right and having to do less mastering. So, but that's an amazing tool for headphone mixing. It really helps show you how your song compares to something in the same genre that somebody else has released out into the world. And so I think that that's a big deal if you're just doing this. Perhaps the last thing we can talk about is working on uh, using the tools you have in the mix process to really get a lot closer. I hinted at that, but in reality, what's happening is not enough young engineers are using reference tracks. Um, what's happening is they're mixing and they think that they can make it sound great all by itself and with their own skill. But even some of the most experienced mixing engineers are pulling up reference tracks until they've worked in a room for long enough that they know the room and they know the music and they know their tools and they can just make it all work. Until you're like at a high level of experience like that, and even afterwards, I know lots of people who use reference tracks. They know that their ears are getting tired. They know that they've been in a dark room staring at a screen for too long, and they pull out a track into their project, and they just push play, or they keep it in Apple Music or someplace else, and they switch back and forth, and they play something, and then they listen to theirs. They play something, listen to theirs, and they think, "Whoa, this is really close. This is great. All of my exhaustion in the ears is fine. I'm still here." Or they play and they think, "Wow, that sounds so different than what I was expecting. I'm not loud enough. I'm not bright enough. I'm not clear enough. It's too muddy, whatever. Or I don't have enough bass, or I have too much bass." That comparative analysis is what humans are best at. We're so good. It's like I can play two songs to students who have never touched an audio console or Logic. I can play two songs and say, "Tell me the differences between these two songs," and the inexperienced ear can do it because we've been doing it our whole lives. If I bring an inexperienced student into a control room and I play like a fresh song, and there's no reference, they have no idea, and I say, "Tell me what I need to do to fix this," there may be some obvious things. "Wow, that is so much bass. I can't hear that." Or "I can't hear the vocals." But the finer points, they're not going to be able to tell the difference to. Just like that with a young engineer who maybe is working on a mix for like 4 hours. From the beginning of the mix time to the end of the 4 hours, their ears are going to have shifted and changed. The minute they learn the lyrics to the song, the minute that they can understand what the words are, it no longer matters if the vocals are quite loud enough or not, because their brain has switched from not understanding the words and trying to "Oh, I understand the words now, I don't have to listen to that anymore." That's what our brains do. So the minute you learn the words, you have to be using other techniques to make sure that the vocals are sitting in the right pocket still. Or you have to be super critical or objective about it, and you have to really go through and make sure that just because you understand doesn't mean that you don't have to mix them in the right place anymore. Because you want someone who hears the song for the very first time to either hear certain parts or the words or whatever and be able to understand them. You can't just assume that they're going to learn the words and then hear it like you do. So we take breaks. It's like you get to a place where you're comfortable on a song, like turn it off for like 20 minutes. Go outside, do something else, come back in, be very critical on the very first time you listen to it again to see what it is and where it is you left everything, so that you can make a little mental list of what you need to change still so that it'll get better instead of just going right back to where you were. Okay, so is it possible to mix on headphones? Yeah, it's possible to mix? Is it possible to master on headphones? If you are really careful. I don't know if a mastering engineer would agree, but it certainly has happened. And some people can do it, and others shouldn't be mixing on headphones until they actually learn all the skills. It's like I'm sure there's a mastering engineer out there who had to at some point make some changes to a master on headphones, and because of all of the experience they have, knowing how things should sound and where it was before, that they could do that successfully. And then there's people who have tried doing all kinds of things on headphones and should really throw them away and buy speakers and build a recording studio, right? So there's all kinds of areas on the spectrum of this. Let's move just for the next 3 or 4 minutes. If anyone has any questions, this is a great time to ask questions. I've covered all the material I really wanted to cover in this. There's probably more things we could talk about, but I think this is a pretty good introduction to the content. So if you have any questions, logic related, not logic related, anything at all, let me know right now in the chat. And if we don't have anything, then that's a great time to pull the plug on this stream. And if we have some cool questions, then we'll talk about them for a couple minutes. Otherwise, that's what we're looking at. So I'll wait and see for a second here. I'm going to reset the NX off of the track. I'm going to leave the gain plugin in because it was pulling it right to about -14 on this song. And so that means the minute now that I'm happy with all of the parts, which I'm pretty happy on this song. I can export it and upload it through DistroKid, my primary distribution service. I've gone back and forth with TuneCore and DistroKid, and they've both sponsored content on this channel at various times, or supported content, I should say. And I'll never say anything negative about either one of them. Dan says, do you listen and critique other people's stuff? I love to critique other people's stuff and listen to it. And so if you have something, I need to put a call out on the channel. There's a place you can post and then maybe provide a link, and then just do like a Friday listening session to anyone who wants me to critique, final tracks and hear them. So that's a good idea. Maybe I'll set that up for Friday afternoon this week. Feels like a good end of the week live stream to do, because there's, I don't know, it just feels like the end of the week kind of thing to do, going into the weekend, getting someone to listen to your stuff and tell you about it. Like I said, make sure you're subscribed to my channel and look at my feed. I'll put up a link later today, and it'll be a link to like a Google form where you can actually upload something. Or you could email it to an email link to something like a Google Drive. The YouTube channel page, I believe, has contact information on it right now. So we've had a few more people just jumping on the stream. Welcome, everybody. We're actually getting close to wrapping up. We've been going for about 45 minutes. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, only because it'll tell you when I go live on the channel, and so you can have access to that information. It'll also make sure you see my other non-live stream content, which, as I said at the very beginning of this, we're going to be doing more non-live stuff starting next week. I've taken a hiatus from making videos and just doing live streams because there's a certain part when I start a new semester at the university where my brain is in other places. And so instead of sitting down, scripting, making content, making sure it has all the right stuff, I just get to turn it on and talk and have less of a plan. And I think it works out better in some ways. So thank you all for watching. Says there's like 9 or 10 of you right now. So Dan, look for that on the channel, the post. And if you don't see it eventually or you miss it somehow, I look at all the comments on all of my videos. So just go to my channel and put a comment on a video, and we can talk back and forth there. And Dan, just so you know, it would be on like a live stream, so other people would hear it as well. So the only criteria I have is that it's not already like copyrighted and in the system. But if you're looking for feedback, hopefully it's not at that point yet. Just because I don't want to get demonetized or a copyright strike or something. That's almost always why I use my own music for these type of videos, is because I own all the copyright information. But if you have stuff that's not at that level yet, then that's what I'll be asking for. Okay, I think this is time. 46 minutes. 15 minutes shorter than normal, but covered the topic. If you missed the beginning, go back. We do mostly talk about the topic that was on the thumbnail in the title, mastering on headphones in Logic Pro, and looked at some of the tools and had a discussion about them, some tips and tricks. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Dan, Mouse said it, Martin, Thomas, everybody else who commented. Yuri, I saw yours. If you're still on, I saw your messages before you retracted them. Thanks, everybody, and have a great Wednesday or wherever you are, whatever day it is. So talk to you later. Bye, everybody.